Our next guest on the Sports Hour show is Vice President of the Sunshine Heights Cricket Club in charge of cricket operations. He's the principal of the Sacred Heart Primary School in Fitzroy. He was formerly the deputy principal at the Mother of God School in Ardea, and he's also the scoreboard operator of one of the biggest stadiums in the world, the MCG. Welcome to the Sports Hour show. This is BRIMBANK Live on Live FM. Welcome, Matthew Shawcross.
Thanks, Max. How are you?
Yes, and good thanks, Matthew. It's great to have you on. I want to talk a bit about your early life before you came to Sunshine Heights. Can you tell us, you lived in Geelong, can you tell us a bit about your teenage years and early adulthood?
Yeah, so, grew up in Geelong and went to the famous sporting factory, St. Joseph's, where, I was really lucky to have a really good education there and, as well as get exposure to, lots of sporting opportunities. And, from there, graduated year 12 and then enrolled in a Bachelor of Science at Melbourne Uni. And it was probably at that point that I relocated to Melbourne. But still, kept my involvement with sport in Geelong at that point for a little while, and then, eventually ended up, sort of relocating permanently to Melbourne. So, with everything. So, Geelong was a great place to grow up. Very lucky, really. Yeah. Yeah.
And was sport always your bit, like your interest in those early years for you? And you speak about St. Joseph's being the sporting factory. Did you play with any other athletes that went on to become famous or anything?
It was interesting. On the second part of that question, there were a couple of AFL footballers, or guys that went on to play AFL football that were there at my time. Mark Neal, who ended up coaching Melbourne for not very long, but he coached Melbourne for a little while, and he was a very good school footballer, outstanding school footballer, and probably played about 60 or 70 games for Geelong and Richmond. And then the one that's probably more well known as a footballer was Michael Mansfield, who went through at the same time as me, and he played. He would have played around about 200 games for Geelong and then a few games for Carlton at the end of his career. He was a member of a lot of the Geelong grand final teams that unfortunately all fell short in the 90s. But, so they were both coming through St. Joseph's at the same time as me. They're probably the two most well-known sports people that are around my era. But, and in terms of my own sort of experiences, probably it was really a lot of it was through my dad. Like, Dad was a really top cricketer, local cricketer. He'd come down from near Echuca when he was sort of in his teens and for work, and he played a lot of local cricket in Geelong. I think for a long period of time he was the leading wicket taker in the history of the association down here. So my early memories are really when I was 6 years old, going and watching him play every Saturday. And you mentioned in the intro that I'm the scoreboard operator at the MCG, and that is true. But my introduction to operating scoreboards was when I was 6 years old. And Dad was playing, and I used to do the numbers on the board, the little hang-up numbers that you put up. Yep. And I always remember the umpire. We had this one umpire that used to umpire quite regularly, and whenever we had him, he used to always give me 20 cents. And in those days, 20 cents was probably like giving a kid a $5 note now, Yeah.
And what did you do with the 20 cents?
It'd always be, spent on food at the canteen or something like that. But so they were my early memories. And then from there was probably a few of us kids knocking around at the cricket club at that time who all had dads that were playing. And we used to, like, once we sort of got to probably, 8, 9 years old, we all started playing as well, in the under 13s. And, and just went from there, really. And that was where, for me, cricket was always sort of the main sport that I played. I played a bit of footy as well at school and on weekends, but I was never really that gifted in the area of football. But cricket was always my main thing, and loved swimming. And then, obviously the football side of it, it was more as a spectator. I love watching AFL footy, something that, Dad and I did from when I was a really young age. I think I've been a member of Geelong Footy Club for 40 years. And I can still remember going and standing on a box in the outer with Dad when I was about 6 years old.
Yeah.
And then, and then probably when I was about 13, Dad had a really serious health scare or health issue. And fortunately, he came through that. But as a result of that, and the recovery that was required and everything, we sort of decided to get reserve seats, and we've had those reserve seats ever since. And, so we've been sitting in the same seats for about, it's a new stand now, but the same spot for about 33 seasons until this season, of course.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to hear those stories of your younger days. When did you make the move to Melbourne? And I'm guessing that was for university. And can you talk to us a bit about those years just after finishing high school in your early 20s?
Yeah. So I'd played, all my cricket in Geelong up until that point. And then, as I said, was successful in getting into it was interesting. When I left school, I wanted to do physio. And in those days, you had to do a Bachelor of Science as part of, doing physio. And so I was successful to get into this Bachelor of Science degree at Melbourne Uni. And with that, there were quite long contact hours and what sort of thing. And in those days, nowhere near the number of train services between Geelong and Melbourne as what there are now. And so I moved up to Melbourne and lived on campus at Melbourne Uni at Newman College, which is right next. You'd know Newman College well, Max, being a Melbourne University cricketer, right next to the Melbourne Uni cricket ground there. Yeah. And look, it was an interesting time because I didn't probably find that the course was really what I was looking for, and ended up not really enjoying the study side of it so much. But the sports side was fantastic because, they have college sport competitions on Wednesday afternoons. So we would play college cricket against all the other colleges on the main oval there at university, at Melbourne Uni, where you play. And, the first year we were fortunate enough to win the whole tournament, it was a great tournament because there's a lot of really, really good cricketers that were playing in it. And, so that was a really good way to meet new friends and new people and sort of, and also get a chance to, play another game every week on top of Saturdays as well. And then the other side that was really good at that time was being at Newman College, which was run by the Jesuits, and met this young priest who had a really sort of strong sense of social justice, and he started this group up. We asked for volunteers to go. It's probably about 10 or 12 of us that used to go out to Richmond twice a week of a night after we'd finished study for the day. And in those days, a lot of the Vietnamese refugees were coming into Richmond, and we were assigned, and what the job was to go and basically to tutor them in English and try and, support them in their early settlement into Australia. And so we went and there was a group of us that were assigned to this family, or it was an extended family, but there was about 8 young boys, ranging in age from about 12 to 18, who'd all arrived in Australia, no parents there, nothing, and they literally, had no English whatsoever. And so we were sort of assigned to them to tutor them. And then as time went on, we sort of developed friendships with them, because some of them weren't that much younger than us. And, and it was a really great experience, and something that I really enjoyed doing. And it probably started getting me thinking more about teaching rather than staying in the course that I was in. So I'm always probably a big believer that, no learning is wasted learning. And it was kind of like, even though the course side of it didn't really work out for me, but it opened up another door that I would perhaps never have thought about. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that how you sort of, you moved, like you got interested in different multicultural backgrounds from that experience, teaching the Vietnamese and helping them with the English language? Was that a really good experience that, held you in good stead down the track?
Yeah, for sure, Max. Look, I mean, I as I said, I had a really terrific upbringing in Geelong, but in lots of ways it was quite sheltered, because in those days Geelong was, big parts of Geelong were very monocultural. I mean, there was certainly a lot of European migrants that were living in certain parts of Geelong, but I really hadn't spent a lot of time with many different cultural sort of communities until I went to university. And it was probably just through, wanting to embrace that and just learn more about, people's lives and people's backgrounds. And it just opened me up to a whole new world. So for sure, that experience, along with some friends who came from diverse backgrounds as well that I met in my time at Melbourne Uni, probably just really opened me up to a whole new world. And definitely the tutoring side of it, it definitely sparked a passion there. And it worked out very well in the end.
Yeah. And then you came across and you got involved with Sunshine Heights. How and why did you get involved with Sunshine Heights?
Yeah, so it's sort of there's a couple of layers to that. So the year after I did the tutoring of the boys, I ended up transferring courses and went and did a teaching degree. Graduated from ACU, and then landed a job at St Paul's in West Sunshine.
Yeah.
And, one of the most culturally diverse areas in Melbourne. And it was really, ironic, given, that my spark to get into teaching was in working with Vietnamese refugees. And St Paul's in those days, probably 60% of the school community were children of Vietnamese refugees.
Wow.
So it was a great little circle for me. And so working there, and probably about maybe 5 years into my time there, I was getting pretty heavily involved in the community, and it was taking a lot of, I guess, I was taking a lot of interest in how we could get young people, particularly young people from perhaps vulnerable backgrounds. And when I say vulnerable, it might be either financially vulnerable or socially vulnerable, educationally vulnerable, and getting them more connected in their community. And anyway, I was teaching this class. We had a whole stack of boys who were playing cricket at lunchtime, and they really, many of them, some of them did, but many of them didn't really have much of an idea. But like I could sort of see, well, this is something that they're really, getting quite passionate about and really interested in. And I knew that at the same time there was an ad in our school newsletter, like advertising junior players, wanted for next season. And I had no idea. Like I didn't even know where the club was, even though it was just up the road from the school. I didn't realise that was their home ground, Sunshine Heights at that time. So anyway, I rang the number of the president at the time and spoke to him. And I guess it's one of those situations where I think you hear the saying you only get one chance to make a good first impression. And I was just really, really impressed by the way I was sort of welcomed in that conversation about, bringing some boys down. As it happened, I think it was the next week that was the first training session. So I took the boys I sort of, arranged for the boys to go down. We brought about 10 boys down at that stage for that training session. Got there and, I sort of introduced myself, had a bit of a chat. We were talking a little bit about cricket and they said, do you mind coming in and helping us a bit? So I went in and helped for a little bit. And by the end of that session, I was coach of the team. But yeah. So that's how it sort of all started. I coached that team for a couple of seasons. And then at the same time, I was still playing cricket in Geelong for my club, for St. Joseph's. And it got to, I think, the third season that I was at Heights. There was a really bad drought in Victoria that year, a really, really serious drought. And there literally had not been a drop of rain for, the best part of 12 months. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the ovals were really suffering. And in particular, Geelong was an area that was really, really suffering. And the grounds got so bad that the councils had to close them. And they cut the season. They basically said, cut the season short at Christmas. And they had the finals, like they turned the whole season into one-day games. They had the finals right before Christmas. Now, ironically, the grand final was washed out, would you believe? It was the only rain. It was the only day it rained for 12 months and the grand final got washed out. But
that's incredible.
Funny story. So, look, I was probably in my early 30s. So I was sort of like, I was, still a fairly reasonable cricketer back then. And I thought, well, do I really want to miss half a season of cricket? I've got this involvement at this other club, coaching juniors. Why don't I just see if, they want me to play and so anyway, I spoke to the club and they were really keen to have me come. And as it turned out, so I still had to get a clearance because even though I wasn't really leaving my other club, it was just, I was more on loan. But so the clearance deadline in those days was the 31st of December. So I had to quickly rush a clearance through after the finals and then before the deadline. And then, first game after Christmas, and then I started playing in the first in the A-turf at Sunshine Heights for the second half of the year. So that was how I sort of started playing. And I think the following year I went back to St. Joseph's because I sort of had a few things I wanted to achieve there. And then after that, came back and I've played at Heights ever since. So probably I think entering about my 14th season at Heights as a player this year.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story about how you got involved at Sunshine Heights, and it's great to hear that. And since then, the impact you've made is massive at the club. For the listeners, we're talking to Matthew Shawcross, who is the Vice President of the Sunshine Heights Cricket Club right now, in charge of cricket operations. He's been involved at the club as club coach for the seniors and has coached myself as a junior and many other juniors for a number of years. Now, Matthew, you went to Mother of God as deputy principal there. What year was that? And so from St. Paul's, you brought over a lot of Vietnamese kids to the club. Can you tell us, those kids, were they, for the listeners from Sunshine Heights, they'd know there was Kenneth Doan and Tai Nguyen and those Vietnamese players. Were they the ones that you brought across to the club, Matthew?
So that was when I was still at St. Paul's in the mid-2000s. So Tai Nguyen was a St. Paul's boy. Kenneth actually, he was an interesting story, Kenneth Doan. We'd already started playing. As I said, we started with about 10 or 11 kids, but by the end of the year, we had about 15. And Kenneth was one of those extra kids that came. He didn't go to St. Paul's, Kenneth, but he lived locally. And I remember one day we were training and Kenneth's dad drove past, and Kenneth wasn't with him, but he stopped his car and he came out and he came over to the nets and said, "Oh, my son, he likes this game. Can he join?" And we said, "Yeah, absolutely." You know, so the next week Kenneth came along, and that's how Kenneth got involved. But but we had a lot of Vietnamese boys back in those days, and we also we had a lot of boys from European sort of backgrounds as well, and some that were sort of probably less traditional, you know, and like the club has been for many, many years. And then we had, in that first year, we had one boy of South Sudanese background, David Deng, who was our first ever South Sudanese player at the club. He'd arrived as a refugee just that year. And then the following year, we had another couple of South Sudanese boys join, Ring and Akon Malien, and then it's just all grown prodigiously from there. So, but back in those days, the club hadn't had many juniors at all for a period of time, and it was kind of like building from the ground up. So we just started with that one team and then sort of gradually grew from there, I guess, yeah.
And how important is it, after all these years you've experienced the club accepting you to the club and your request to bring all these boys to come and play cricket, how important is it for clubs to be embracing and inviting of community groups that come from their own backyard?
Yeah, well, look, I've always said, Max, if, you know, and I've seen the good and the bad side of this with various clubs and various communities, but I've always said that if your local sporting club doesn't reflect the demographic of its local community, then there's really not a lot of point in it existing. You know, if your local sporting club goes out and buys overseas players and, you know, imports players from other areas and all that sort of thing, it's kind of defeating the whole purpose, because at the end of the day, community sport is not about how many premierships you win and, you know, all that kind of thing. It's so much bigger than that. It's about providing engagement for young people, providing purpose for young people, and particularly in more vulnerable postcodes, it's about providing perhaps, you know, the absolute highlight of their week. And maybe in some cases the only highlight of their week. So, you know, community sport opens up so many opportunities. It's not about, as I say, winning premierships, or it's not about producing the next batch of elite athletes. Now, it's nice if that happens. That's a nice little byproduct. But if that's your only goal, then most clubs are going to fail. Most clubs are going to fail because, as I say to the guys that I coach, only one team can win the premiership each year. Only 11 players can play cricket for Australia at any one time. You know, so if the only purpose is to win premierships or to play for Australia, then why do it? You know, because hardly anyone's going to succeed. But if the purpose is about building community engagement and about creating more connected society and about building a level of self-confidence and purpose and self-esteem and friendship, then everyone can achieve that. So in lots of ways, you know, my advice to clubs is you go for it and you roll your sleeves up and you get it done, because every single club can have a sense of achievement out of doing that. And, you know, and be contributing, you know, in such an important way to the community. So, yeah, unfortunately, there are also, cases where that doesn't happen, and young people can be, you know, become a bit sort of, I guess, adrift of their community. And we see that, you know, in some of the negative media that we see from time to time. And you often think, well, you know, if that young person perhaps had the opportunities that, say, the young people at Sunshine Heights have had, then maybe the path that they chose may have been a very different one. Yeah.
Yeah, and a great example of that is when you went to Mother of God and you were a teacher there and the deputy principal, bringing over all those kids from the community just locally of Sunshine Heights Cricket Club. You brought over a lot of South Sudanese kids who don't typically play cricket, and it's a great example of engaging with the local kids in the community and bringing them over to the club. Can you tell us more about how that sort of happened, and now it's such a big part of Sunshine Heights, and we've even had success with cricketers going and playing high levels.
Yeah,
meeting some royalty in Prince Charles, one of our club cricketers. It's gotten that far. So, can you explain to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a really passionate advocate for the South Sudanese community. I think if you look back over the migration story of Australia, in lots of ways, I think our South Sudanese community are probably the most vulnerable group that's ever come to Australia, and that's a big statement when you're talking about communities that have come here following world wars and all sorts of and major civil unrest in their own country and all that type of thing. But I think if you look at the overall picture of the South Sudanese community from a social justice perspective, I think that it would be pretty hard to dispute that community is the most afflicted in terms of what they've had to endure as a community. So I'm very, very passionate about creating opportunities and both through education and community connection that can see generations of I guess trauma that community has suffered, to see it potentially be turned around. And, that takes a massive community effort. But it's something that I'm really passionate about leading. And I think that, if done successfully, it could be just an amazing story in, 50 years' time when we look back on it. And, so look, that's sort of where my passion comes from. And I guess at the time that I was at Mother of God, a lot of the South Sudanese migration or humanitarian visas were given between about that 2002 to 2006 period. And I came to Mother of God just after that. So a lot of the South Sudanese had been in Melbourne for maybe a year or two, maybe three. Were just starting to settle and just starting to sort of navigate their way a little bit. But the opportunities for sport just really weren't there. So that was, I think, a really big motivating factor for me to get them involved in cricket, was just to get them involved in a sport and in the community. Unfortunately, a couple of other sports were really quite inaccessible because of the cost involved. And I knew that through my involvement, I was already involved at the club. I knew that there were a couple of South Sudanese families already playing. And at that stage, like, the kids, they didn't care. They didn't know anything about cricket. They just wanted to be socially connected. And that goes back to my point before. It wasn't about, I don't know what this sport is, or I don't know how to play it. It was just an opportunity to go and have fun. Now, on top of that, I guess many of the South Sudanese community are very, very athletically built. And so really taking on a new sport is probably not as big a challenge in terms of being able to pick it up because of that athleticism. Probably the biggest challenge is the hand-eye coordination part of it, because there's not a lot of hand-eye sports in South Sudan. They're more power sports and sort of like, involve a lot of running and athleticism. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why out of the 40-odd South Sudanese cricketers that we've had come through Sunshine Heights over the last 15 years, there's probably only been one or two that have been really good batsmen. Most of them have been bowlers. And I wonder sometimes whether you'd attribute that to that sort of, lack of exposure to hand-eye sports when they were really little, when they were in that 2, 3, 4-year-old sort of period where most kids in Australia are perhaps exposed to that. So that's sort of something that's, it's been a really wonderful journey to see so many young people who perhaps wouldn't have been able to be involved in sport come over to Sunshine Heights, be embraced, be accepted, have wonderful role models at the club, and become really outstanding young people. And that's the thing, as I said, that we, I think, as a club can be most proud of, way more proud of than, any premiership we might win or any other sort of honours. I think that to be able to say that, 40-odd young people who come from the most vulnerable migrant group that's ever come to Australia have come through our club and have developed into, really, terrific young adults and are doing, really great things in the world. And some of them are still playing cricket at Sunshine Heights. Some of them are playing Premier cricket. Some of them haven't played cricket for years, but they take the lessons and the good experiences that they had at the club to then transfer into other areas of their lives. So, yeah, it's been a wonderful story, and it's great. Some of those families, the youngest siblings in those families are now playing in our junior grade. So yeah, it's been a great story, and long may it continue.
It's brilliant the work you do, Matt, and we're going to be hearing a bit more about these stories from South Sudanese players that have been at the club on the Sports Hour show on BRIMBANK Live and Live FM. So it'll be great to hear what they've gotten out of the opportunity you've given them. So I wanted to ask you what you instill. You've been at the club for a number of years working with juniors, seniors, and also in the community as a teacher. What do you try and instill in people who come through Sunshine Heights and through the BRIMBANK community?
Yeah, look, I think what I try to instill in any young person that I work with is, and it's quite simple, it's to be generous. I think that my philosophy is, I think that if you are able to be generous in your life, then you're going to lead quite a satisfying life. Because, and when I say about being generous, I mean there's probably 3 facets to it. And with young people, one of those facets at the moment for many of them is not achievable, and that's being generous with your wealth or your money. But that's just something that I like them to think about and think, well, if you're able to achieve really well through your education and you're able to get, good employment down the track, then that's something that you should always remember, to be generous with your wealth as well. But I think most importantly, to be generous with your time and to be generous in your care of other people, and not be thinking so much about yourself, but to be thinking about others. And if you can be generous in the way that you care about other people, and generous with your time, then you're going to have a lot of positive impact on a lot of other people. And I guess, as I say, in turn, you actually lead a really satisfying life, because you get a lot out of that yourself, about seeing other people, I guess, thrive as a result of your generosity. Yeah, so that's the biggest thing I try to instill. And now, whilst, you know, obviously I'm an educator and we want young people to be able to read and write really, really well, and we want them to be able to use other skills really, really well. I think, you know, in order to be a complete person, or in order to really use those things effectively, there's not much point in being able to write really well if you don't ever share it with anyone, you know? So yeah, I guess that's sort of where I come from. Yeah.
Well, Matthew, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show and come on and tell some of your stories, which is really interesting. I hope the viewers have really enjoyed it, and I'm sure they have. So really big thank you to you for coming on and being involved with the Sports Hour show.
Pleasure, Max, and it's been great to be interviewed by you as well, and lots of fond memories coaching you, and all the best with your season coming up.
Thanks very much, Matthew. And that was Matthew Shawcross from the Sunshine Knights Cricket Club, who is currently holding the position of Vice President in charge of cricket operations. He's also coached the club, led the first grade team to a premiership, and he is a principal at the Sacred Heart School in Fitzroy. He's also worked in education previously at Mother of God School, and he's the scoreboard operator of the MCG at one of the biggest stadiums, which I'm sure we'll speak about another day. But a big thank you to Matthew Shawcross for coming on. This is BRIMBANK Live on Live FM, and that was the Sports Hour show.